Like nothing more than another homeless woman in Houston trying to scrape together a meal. They laughed at her. One smirked and shook his head. Fix it for food? Lady, you can't even fix yourself. The others burst into cruel laughter, mocking her until she shuffled away with her head down. They never realized the woman they ridiculed was once a name that sent sparks through the racing world. They didn't know she had broken barriers, terrified rivals, and touched speeds most of them couldn't imagine. What they saw as a beggar had once been a legend. And what happened to her wasn't an accident. It was something much darker. Her name was Naomi Carter, though for many years that name had nearly disappeared from memory. Born in Houston's Fifth Ward, Naomi grew up the daughter of a mechanic. Her father, a wiry man with oil-stained fingernails and endless patience, ran a small neighborhood garage. Most of his customers couldn't always pay in cash. Sometimes he was paid with groceries, favors, or nothing at all. Naomi spent her childhood at his side, watching his hands work miracles under hoods and learning how to tell what was wrong with an engine just by listening to it breathe. By 10 years old, Naomi could strip down a carburetor faster than men 3 times her age. By 16, she was quietly working on the engines of drag racers who slipped her bills under the table, pretending it wasn't a teenage girl giving them the edge on the quarter mile. Speed became her first language. Racing became her heartbeat. And by her 20s, Naomi wasn't just fixing cars, she was driving them. Her rise was meteoric. Naomi became one of the first black women to qualify in several regional stock car circuits across Texas. Crowds didn't always welcome her, the slurs hurled from the stands were sharp enough to cut steel. Competitors muttered that she didn't belong. But when the green flag dropped, Naomi's engine drowned out their hatred. She drove like someone born with fire in her veins. She could see lines nobody else saw, a former rival once said. Corners bent for her. Engines obeyed her. By 2002, whispers in the racing world were almost breathless. Naomi Carter could be the one, the first black woman to break into the national spotlight. Sponsors began circling. Journalists started paying attention. For the first time, a barrier that had stood for decades looked like it might finally fall. And then, it happened. The crash. Officially, the records say it was a mechanical failure. A practice run on a muggy August evening. Naomi's car barreled down the straightaway at nearly 160 miles per hour when the brakes failed. The machine slammed into the wall in a violent, sickening blur of fire and twisted metal. When the flames were put out and the wreckage peeled open, Naomi was still alive. But her body was broken. Her right leg shattered, her spine fractured. The doctors told her what she already knew the moment she opened her eyes: her career was over. The headlines mourned the tragedy. Commentators lamented the loss of a promising talent. But behind closed doors, whispers began. Naomi herself suspected what no one dared say aloud: her car had been tampered with. Mechanics had murmured about things that didn't add up, about brake lines that looked wrong. But no investigation came. No officials dug deeper. The team called it faulty parts. Racing authorities moved on. And Naomi, who had been on the verge of breaking history, was left to fade away. Her injuries ended her career, but the aftermath destroyed her life. Insurance battles drained what little savings she had. Sponsors vanished overnight. She tried working as a mechanic, but her body wasn't the same. The pain slowed her down. The job slipped away. Bills piled higher. One by one, she lost everything: her apartment, her car, her belongings. By 2010, Naomi Carter, once a rising star, was living on the streets of the very city where her name had once been cheered. She wandered from shelters to gas stations, offering to fix broken cars for a few dollars or a warm meal. Most people brushed her off. Some laughed in her face. She became invisible. But legends don't disappear forever. One night, 2 teenagers approached her with a broken dirt bike. They were polite, shy, and clearly desperate. "Ma'am," one asked, "can you fix it? We'll give you $20. For the first time in years, Naomi felt seen. She crouched over the machine, her hands moving almost instinctively, tightening bolts, adjusting cables, coaxing life back into the engine. In minutes, the bike sputtered and roared. The boys were stunned. One of them pulled out his phone and recorded the moment. That video, captioned, "Homeless Lady Fixes Bike in 5 Minutes," hit the internet and spread like wildfire. Within days, millions had seen Naomi's face. And some remembered. Old photos began circulating. A younger Naomi, helmet under her arm, fire suit zipped to the chin, smiling beside a gleaming stock car. Footage resurfaced of her tearing down tracks at blistering speeds, a comet of grit and steel. Reporters dug into her past. From racing prodigy to homeless, the headlines cried. Naomi Carter's story became a sensation, tragic, almost mythic. The woman the world had forgotten was suddenly everywhere. But as the attention grew, so did the questions. Why had her career really ended? Why had there been no investigation into the crash that nearly killed her? Why had officials buried her story so quickly? Theories multiplied. A former mechanic hinted he had seen something suspicious in her car the night before the accident. A rival admitted, off the record, that people upstairs didn't want her breaking through. Sponsors were uneasy about her presence. Powerful men worried about her success. And Naomi herself? She never doubted. She believed her crash had been sabotage. Now, for the first time, people were listening. But attention can be dangerous. As Naomi began speaking out, warning signs appeared. She received anonymous notes telling her to stop talking. Friends she hadn't seen in years whispered that she was being followed. And then came the blow that turned whispers into fear. One of the mechanics who had supported her story was found dead in his garage. Police called it suicide. His family swore it wasn't. Naomi had been invisible for years. Now she was in the spotlight again, and it felt like a target was painted on her back. She couldn't move through the city without being noticed. Reporters hounded her. Some wanted to hear her truth, others seemed to want only to mock her fall. On talk shows and social media, her words, "Can I fix it for food?" were twisted into a punchline. They laughed at the same phrase that had once been a plea for survival, never realizing how much weight it carried. What they didn't understand was simple. Naomi's story was not just about racing. It was about power, corruption, and the people willing to bury anyone who threatened their control. And now, the past was resurfacing. Names were being whispered. Files were being uncovered. Connections between Naomi's crash, her sponsors, and high-ranking racing officials began to surface. It was bigger than one car. Bigger than one driver. It was about a system designed to crush anyone who didn't fit the mold, and what happened when someone dared to challenge it. Naomi Carter was no longer just a homeless woman with grease on her hands. She was a survivor. A witness. And maybe even a threat to the powerful figures who had tried to erase her. The question now is not whether Naomi was sabotaged. It is how far those responsible are willing to go to keep their secrets hidden. Because if Naomi Carter speaks the whole truth, she may not only clear her name. She may expose a conspiracy strong enough to destroy anyone who dares to uncover it. And the forces that once ended her career may not let her walk away a second time. Naomi Carter had spent years forgotten, shuffling through shadows, surviving on scraps of dignity and stubborn will. But now the world was watching again. And for the first time in 2 decades, she had a choice: retreat back into obscurity, or step forward and demand the truth. She chose the latter. The first time Naomi sat down for a televised interview, her hands trembled. Not from fear of the lights or cameras, she had faced far worse, but because she knew her words could ignite something too big to contain. Across from her sat a polished anchor, smiling the kind of smile that wanted a headline more than a story. "Naomi," he began, leaning in, "a lot of people want to believe your crash was just bad luck. What makes you so certain it wasn't?" Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Because I know cars. I grew up under the hood. I know what failure looks like, and I know what sabotage feels like. My crash wasn't an accident. It was a message." The clip spread like fire. Racing fans argued online. Some accused her of chasing attention, others rallied behind her, digging into archives and posting old footage with hashtags like #JusticeForNaomi. For every voice calling her bitter, 10 more called her brave. And then, evidence began to surface. A faded folder leaked online contained inspection notes from the night of Naomi's crash. The handwriting was smudged, but one line was legible: brake line tampered, possible cut, inconsistent with wear. Another document suggested that a replacement part had been signed off without ever being installed. The name scribbled at the bottom of both pages. A senior official in the Texas Stock Racing Association, one who had since risen to national leadership. The press smelled blood. Investigations reopened. Journalists swarmed retired mechanics and old sponsors. And the more they dug, the more the rot was exposed. There had been whispers of other accidents, of careers cut short for reasons that never made sense. Naomi's case was no longer an isolated tragedy, it was proof of a system that had chosen image and profit over fairness and safety. But power does not yield quietly. As Naomi's story gained traction, she felt the shadow of danger creeping closer. Anonymous calls. Unmarked cars idling too long at night. Once, she returned to the shelter where she often slept and found her few belongings shredded, her father's old wrench tossed into the gutter. She could have backed down. Many expected her to. But Naomi was done being silent. She reached out to the 2 boys whose dirt bike she had fixed, the ones who had unknowingly resurrected her story. Their video had given her a voice, now she wanted to give them a lesson. She brought them into the garage of an old friend, showing them how to strip an engine and rebuild it piece by piece. Cameras later captured her leaning over their shoulders, guiding their hands with the same patience her father had once shown her. "Engines don't lie," she told them. "People do. Always listen to the machine." That clip, more than any angry speech, won the public's heart. She wasn't just a victim. She was a teacher, a fighter, someone determined to leave behind more than wreckage. The breakthrough came 6 months later, when a whistleblower, an aging official too tired to carry secrets, stepped forward. In a sworn deposition, he admitted that Naomi had been targeted. Her success had unsettled sponsors who feared changing demographics in the sport. They thought a black woman winning would hurt the brand, he said flatly. The room went silent as his words echoed across courtrooms and news broadcasts. It was the vindication Naomi had waited for all her life. Lawsuits followed. Racing authorities scrambled to settle before trials dragged their name further through the mud. Naomi refused to be bought off quietly. She demanded a public apology, an acknowledgement not only of what was taken from her, but of what her story represented. On a spring afternoon in Houston, she got it. The auditorium was packed with reporters, fans, and young drivers who had grown up hearing whispers of Naomi Carter like a half-forgotten legend. A banner hung behind the podium, honoring trailblazers of racing. The president of the National Association stood stiffly at the microphone, his voice measured. "Today, we recognize Naomi Carter," he said. "A pioneer, a champion in spirit, and a woman whose courage has forced us to confront the failures of our past. We cannot undo the wrongs. But we can begin to make them right." When Naomi's name was called, the applause thundered so loudly she felt it in her bones. Slowly, with the help of a cane, she made her way onto the stage. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, staring at the sea of faces, cheering, clapping, some with tears streaming down. Faces that once would have hurled slurs now shouted her name. The official held out a plaque, engraved with her name and the words, Barrier Breaker Award. Cameras flashed. But Naomi didn't look at the plaque. She looked out at the crowd, her voice carrying steady through the hall. "I never needed an award to know my worth," she said. "What I needed was the truth. And now, the truth is here. This isn't just for me. This is for every racer who was told they didn't belong. For every little girl who was told to sit in the stands instead of behind the wheel. For every dream that was broken because someone was afraid of change." The room erupted again, a sound that washed over her like the roar of an engine on race day. In the weeks that followed, Naomi's life transformed. Racing schools invited her to speak. Young drivers begged her to coach them. Documentaries chronicled her rise, fall, and resurgence. She moved into a small but steady apartment paid for by a fund raised by fans around the world. And the same city that once ignored her now painted murals of her face on garage walls, Naomi Carter, the woman who refused to disappear. But perhaps the greatest reward came not in plaques or headlines, but in the quiet moments. The day she walked back into her father's old garage, long abandoned, dust thick on every surface, she set the worn wrench on the workbench and whispered, "We made it, Daddy." The light through the cracked window caught her face, softening the lines carved by years of hardship. For the first time in decades, Naomi smiled without bitterness. Her story had been nearly erased. But legends, true legends, cannot be erased. They only wait for the right moment to rise again. Naomi Carter had been mocked as a homeless woman begging to fix something for food. She had been cast aside as if her fire had burned out. But in the end, she did more than survive. She proved that even when the world tries to bury you, truth has a way of roaring back to life, louder than engines, stronger than fear, unstoppable as speed itself. And at last, Naomi Carter had not just her name restored, but her dignity, her legacy, and her place in history. When world tries to bury you, just remember truth has a way of roaring back to life louder. If you like this type of content, comment below and subscribe to uncover the truth behind the crime.